Okay, and this last chapter, I definitely read the least
I have like
closely.
nothing about it.
It's very wrap up, very rehashing everything that he's already gone over.
Mm-hmm.
So he talks about the disparity between our values and social reality, which basically says that there are all these economists who expect that humans are selfish, but people are actually good, and you see that in a lot of other ways. At the very least, in our policies, like we value doing good with our policy, but if we don't express that goodness, then we sink into darkness. He talks about afterwards that our myths mask our failings. This is something that I'm totally on board with.
Mm-hmm.
There's this idea of the American dream, freedom of America, the
rugged individual.
Yes, the goodness of rugged individualism, the badness of government aid. I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
The narratives around the country kind of they contribute into this rent-seeking behavior of like lift myself up as much as I can. It's okay to exploit everyone else. That's what rugged individualism is. It's making it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, again, this is the question of like, how do you do it? But shifting towards some kind of narrative of collectivism is where we need to be going.
But shifting the narrative seems so nebulous.
Yeah.
It is nebulous.
Because it's an amalgamation of how our news talks about things on cable and in newspapers and in magazines and what we see in our movies, and like it's everything. There is no one answer because it has to be like a wave of communication.
Yeah.
That leans into it.
Yeah.
And then this tension between embracing change and deep conservatism, which his big idea is like clinging to the past is bad. It clearly can't work for social policy because we don't want to be racist and sexist again.
Shocker.
It doesn't work for healthcare policies because we've always had worse health in the past. Economic policy, no, because we used to have much lower per capita income. International policy, also no, because we don't dominate the world like we did after World War II anymore. So we can't pretend that we do.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't, and environmental policy, because we can't keep exploiting our environment and destroying the earth.
Right.
So it really, in every aspect, like this idea of conservatism just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and he talks about this narrative and this feel and this myth a lot, and he says that the Trump's biggest danger isn't really his policies. Trump's biggest, because they can all be reversed. Trump's biggest danger is the attacks on the institutions and government authority and government officials. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he really talks about a lot this time around is that he wants to remake the government deep state, fire all the government bureaucrats and put his guys in there. Mm-hmm. And that is right out of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is a right-wing talk radio host, right out of Steve Bannon's playbook. He's a very far-right populist figure. And it's about a capture of the state here.
Yes.
Yes. Totally making it inoperable.
Yeah, which is frighteningly authoritarian.
And he's saying it publicly, and people cheer when he says that.
Yes. He wants to undermine public institutions. I think along with like his attacks on media and judiciary really fit in alongside that. Like it is undermining the checks and balances to beef up the power of the executive.
Totally.
He mentioned some silver linings, like our international partners see Trump and they decide they don't like him. I was skeptical on this because you look at a Boris Johnson or several of the other right-wing movements that you already mentioned that are happening in Europe, and I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like they're leaning away from the Trump movement. I don't know. I mean, if anything, I feel like Europe is now like almost pivoting to China in a lot of ways because of America's unpredictability. Yeah. Europe seems open to China.
Right.
At least.
A lot of countries, Portugal, Greece for sure. A lot of countries are open. Italy's open. Well, Italy less so now with the last election, but other countries seem more open to China than the U.S. And I don't That's not a good development at all. And that's because of Trump.
Yes, definitely. So he says silver linings, but then he's like, oh, there are also these dark clouds on the horizons, which it seems directly contradictory, because basically his point here is that Trump has provided this lightning rod of bigotry for other people to exploit. Yeah. And you're like, oh, it's okay to be this way because look at how he's this way. Yeah. And so I don't know. I don't have much more.
The last thing I have is this whole book can be summed up by one idea, that we need to promote the general welfare. We need an agenda on fostering progress, and that has a deep understanding on the sources of wealth of the nation. And the sources of the wealth are good organizations, good organizational capacity, and technological advancement. Government's reputation of being slow and inefficient needs to be broken. All human institutions have their issues, especially those in the market. And what's unique about government institutions is that we have the power to vote and change them. We don't have the power to vote and change the market, but we have the power to vote and change the government. And we should take advantage of that. And the last thing he says is that young people have not lost their idealism yet, and they're the hope. And that ends our reading of Stiglitz.